If you want to throw tall and add coils or slabs on top of your thrown cylinder, some tips are to leave it on the thick side because we're going to be adding the weight of additional coils or slabs and continuing to build up. It helps a little bit to start with it leaning in a little bit, and that's going to help offset the centrifugal force later. The tendency is the taller you get, it's going to want to flare out. So if you start with just a little bit of a slope in, it's going to help offset that later. It also helps if you have a stoneware with a little bit of grog in it. That's going to help you get taller. The finer the clay, the harder it is to go tall. So at this point, I have a cylinder. There's some information I'm going to need before I go make some coils or slabs. I need to know how long my slabs or coils are going to be. If you have one of these rulers, they're handy dandy. It's just a bendable ruler. I'm going to wind that around. So I like to look straight down and get this right in the center of the wall. So it looks like 11.5 inches is the length of the coil or strip of slab that we're going to need. If you don't have one of these handy dandy rulers, you can get super high tech and use string theory. Here's our string theory. We're just going to take a piece of twine, loosely lay that around. And then after you can literally just take the string over and measure your slabs and coils with string, or you can transfer that to a ruler. So you're just gonna mark. That is the length of the slab or coil that I need. So you can lay that on a ruler, or you can just mark it on, take a pin, make a little mark, Sharpie works better, make a mark on your string, and you're gonna know that's how long you're gonna need your strips, slabs or coils. The first few times that you do this, I recommend starting with a narrow cylinder. And the reason is the longer these slabs that we're adding on get, they get a little bit hard to control and transfer and get onto your slab. So practice this on a narrow form. Do 2 or 3 on a narrow form. And once you get the hang of it, slowly start getting wider and wider. For now, I really just want this to firm up while I go roll out some slabs. I'm gonna roll some slabs 1.5 to 2 inches and add them on top of that. But I'm gonna leave my wheel going just ever so slightly so that just that little bit of air movement will help dry and firm up the base. You can also take a heat gun, torch, whatever to this and firm it up. I don't love doing that on these segmented thrown pieces because these seams do tend to want to crack apart if you're too aggressive with a heat gun or torch. So I prefer just to air dry it, firm it up a little bit. This is also pretty thick. It's Oregon white, so it's got a bit of grog in it. So it's going to handle the weight of 1 or 2 slabs added without much drying. If I wanted to go beyond 2 added slabs, I would definitely let it dry probably overnight. That's my preference, is just to let these dry loosely covered overnight and let them firm up naturally rather than being super aggressive with the heat gun. Since we're going to be cutting strips out of the middle of this, I'm not too worried if there's air bubbles on the edges. That area will just get thrown back in the bag and recycled. But if I do see air bubbles in the center, I'll just take a needle tool and pop those air bubbles. I like running the rib over it just because that it makes the air bubbles more obvious. It also compresses that surface. So I'm going to start just with my top edge here. I'm going to cut off all the rough upper area that I'm not going to need. So this can just go back in the recycle area, bag I mean. So that I'm not too worried about air bubbles. So I need to decide, I think I'm just going to do 1.5 inches at a time on this particular piece. Because it's not a super big piece and I didn't leave the bottom like extremely thick. So I'm gonna mark off 1.5 inches, 1.5 inches, 1.5 inches. So this will give me 1, 2, 3, 4 strips. And I might not put them on, in fact, probably I would not put them on in the same day, but I can wrap them up in plastic, set them aside and add 2 today and 2 tomorrow. So I'm going to come down to this end and do the same thing. I'm going to mark 1.5 inches, 1.5 inches, 1.5 inches, 1.5 inches. And we'll trim off this end at that 45-degree angle. So I take the knife and I make sure it's touching the surface. So I want that all the way down and hold that at a 45-degree angle, and I'm just going to come straight across here. And this excess can go in the scrap bag with everything else. So there's a couple different ways to do the two ends. If you're confident that it's exactly 11.5 inches, so I'm measuring this from the midpoint here, you want to hold your knife in the same direction that you were holding it down here. So we're going to have it touch the table, pull it at a 45-degree angle, and pull it across. And this only works if you're super confident. And again, I would go on the bigger side if you want to give yourself some wiggle room rather than making it too small. But we're going to aim for about that 11.5 point at the center mark. And then what happens is you've got these two 45-degree angles that will overlap and join, and it gives you more surface area to join together for your seam. So that's a good, as a rule of thumb, it's a good way to make seams, to give yourself more area to overlap. The other way is just to put this on and cut it while it's on the wheel, to cut it to precisely the exact length. So we'll save one of these to demo that method. So our pot's been firming up with the wheel going while we made our slabs. We have the two different slabs, so we can show you two different methods for joining these, and a serrated rib. That's what I like to use for joining these. So let's start by making sure that we add some moisture back to this upper lip. So I just go in with the serrated rib, dip the serrated rib in water, and score it like that. It's going to form a sludge on the upper surface. This actually didn't dry out a whole bunch. It's not very dry in the studio today, so this is still fairly moist. So we're going to stop that now. And first we'll take the slab that we cut to 11.5 inches. So we're going to score the two ends with a little bit of water. And we're going to score the side that we want sitting down. So again, just dipping my serrated rib in a little bit of water and cross-hatching. We'll do that other side after it's already on here. Okay, so I want to get this fairly centered. And then I'll score this last side that has not been scored yet. And if this is a little on the big side, like I said, it's better to make it too big than too small. But I like to feel and make sure we're centered on there. And then it's just a teeny bit longer than I'd like. I'm going to bring this back in here a little bit. And you can use a knife or a needle tool, but I'm just going to come down and make this join that other side a little bit better. So we'll take just that much out, so not much at all. I'm going to go in and score that side again since I made a fresh cut. Okay, again, I want to feel all the way around to make sure it's centered. Then I'm going to start at this seam here, and I'm going to use my fingers to blend, dragging clay from one end of the slab to the other to kind of join that. I'm going to do that on the inside and the outside. And then I want to join it on the outside also, and I'll use my serrated rib for that as well. So I'm just going to start by dragging some of the clay from this slab down onto my cylinder. And I'll go both directions. So I'm going to kind of cross-hatch here. And notice I'm using my left hand to support, or my non-dominant hand to support the inside of the pot because it is still fairly soft. So we want to work our way around and drag. Again, we're dragging clay from the new piece of clay that is that strip of slab, and we're dragging that down onto our cylinder. And then we are going to add, I'm going to add one more strip, and then we'll turn the wheel back on and we'll throw it to get everything back centered, smoothed off and thinned out. Okay, so we've got that much done. It's going to be hard to see, but I'm going to go ahead and work the inside. I'm going to cross hash that too. On the inside, if you can fit your serrated rib, you can use your serrated rib. I have some of these where I've cut them. This is one of the thicker ones, but the thinner ones cut really easy, and I cut them into smaller pieces so I can work the inside of things. If you don't have a serrated rib, you can use the rounded end of the wooden knife tool and just work that. We're doing the same thing. We're just dragging some clay from the new strip. We're dragging that down onto the other piece. And notice again, I'm using my opposite hand to support the outside so that I don't throw this off balance. And we're just going to slowly work our way around. Now I'll take our second strip that we didn't trim and just trim that right on the wheel. We're going to do the same thing. We want to turn the wheel on just a bit and use our serrated rib dipped in water to start to form a slurry on the top here. This is the strip that we didn't trim. We're going to use a serrated rib to score with water and form a slurry on the side that's going to attach to our cylinder. And we'll score this top piece a bit here because the top piece will stay and be joined. So we want sticky side down. Another thing is you can see where our previous seam was. You don't want to line your seams up on top of each other. So I try to spread those around about a third. So I'll move this a third of the way around, and then my next, so my first seam is here, this seam's here, my next seam I would put here. Just to rotate so that they're not all stacked on top of each other. That just adds a little bit of extra strength. Okay, then I'm just going to curl this excess in. And then, again, with either a knife tool or a needle tool, I can line this up and just cut straight down where these two are going to join together at that a matching 45-degree angle. So here's our extra. That can go back in the scrap bag. And here's those two 45-degree angles. I'm going to score the other side. All right, get these lined up. And if it's still a little bit too long, I don't like, if you have too much extra, it kind of creates a bulge at the seam, and we don't want to bulge. So I'm actually going to take a little bit more off this one, preserving that 45-degree angle. There, that feels a lot better. And grab our serrated rib, score it one more time. There, that feels much better. So we're going to do the same thing. Okay, so we've added two strips, 1.5 inch each. We've scored and blended really well so that you can't tell it's not totally obvious that there's two separate pieces there. So the next thing we want to do is we're going to add a little bit of water. You don't want to oversaturate it. And we're going to pull this up and thin it out. This is a little bit thicker than the cylinder down here because we want to make our slabs thicker so that we can pull them up and get some additional height. So we're gonna just very gently, I'm keeping my wheel speed fairly slow-ish. And frequently at this point, you need to start standing up. You can't sit down and throw anymore. But it's important to find some way to like tuck your elbows into your sides really tight because you still need that stability to keep your hands even. You may at this point want to throw with a sponge too. It's important that we keep enough moisture that this is gliding through your hands easily. Otherwise, it's pretty fragile at the seams. You don't want to tear the seams, but you also don't want to saturate the bottom and weaken the bottom. So a sponge is possibly a good idea depending on what kind of clay you're working with. So we're going to stand up here. And I'm going to tuck my elbows into my body. some of the extra sludge off here. See if I can still reach down inside. Otherwise, there's the old sponge on a stick trick, but I can still, so far I can still reach the inside. So I'm getting the extra moisture out of the inside. That's really important because it'll weaken the lower section. And we need the lower section to stay strong. So if I needed to at this point, I could go on top with a needle tool and level the top off if it was taller on one side than the other. I don't see that right now, so I don't think that's an issue. I am going to use the rib one more time here to straighten it up. And then what I'm going to do is let it firm up overnight. And I'm going to leave a strip of plastic directly on the upper rim. We want to keep that upper rim as moist as possible. We want it to be the same moisture level as the strips that we're going to add. So I'm going to put some plastic right here and then just loosely cover the rest of it and let that bottom part firm up before I try to add any more coils. And notice I am trying to keep it still slightly tilted inward. This is plenty thick that once we get all the coils on, we can shape it and stretch it different directions. So we will change the shape of it after we've finished adding the height. So right now we're just interested in getting the height that we want and keeping the bottom nice and strong. So I'm gonna put plastic on it, lightly cover it, and let it sit before we add any more layers to that. But I just need a piece that will lay right on the top here. The dry cleaning bag, I like the thickness. You don't want plastic that's too thick because it will leave marks on your work. So I'm just going to just super loosely cover the outside like that, so that there's some air loosely circulating around the bottom, but that top edge is going to stay moist. So we'll let that set and firm up. And I'm pulling just like I would normally pull, other than I'm standing. I have my elbows anchored to my body instead of my knees in the sitting position. And I'm moving up at a steady pace, just getting the thickness back to even, so we're a consistent thickness all the way up. And pushing it back into center because all that blending of the slabs tends to push it off center. Again, I would start narrow for my first one just to practice, and then get wider if we need to get wider. Once this is firmed up, I could collar this in. It's thick enough to belly it back out. I always am making sure that I've got any extra water out of the bottom, so I could still barely fit my arm down this, but this tool certainly makes it easier. So you want to make sure you don't leave any standing water in your pot. And then I would loosely cover this, let it firm back up a bit before I finish it off. And let's just take a look here, see how we're doing for height. Looks like we're about 15.5 inches. So depending on what you want to make, this is a great way to get taller.